Hey everybody, how are you doing today? This is Brady Napier here to give you a quick preview of this 5-panel system and Dash OS and how event triggers and Dash OS in general can provide you with some extended functionality within your systems. And I thought it would be pretty helpful to kind of see a system and see what's going on at the same time that we look here at our program as we run through the actual programming and how some of it all comes together. So you may have seen the preview video already that I've created to kind of showcase, but more for the end users and whatnot. So obviously within this video, we'll be looking at the programming and how some of this stuff comes together, and how you can kind of read this file and follow along and get an idea of how this functionality is actually working. The heart of what we're doing with the system is the Dash OS Event Triggers module, which allows us to send macros into the background, process commands to happen into the future or at an interval if we want, as well as to just simply do multiple macros at the same exact time, which is really how we get kind of the speed and the responsiveness that you see from the demo video. And if you haven't seen it, check it out and take a look as we go through kind of all the functions. So let's take a look at our programming here first, and let's start and say, let's see how we're going to turn on all the TVs and how this all comes together. In the programming, I'll just start with showing you kind of the page itself, just like that. So it opens. We have scenes, shortcuts, control, surround, draperies. Scenes allows us, that's going to be like our macros essentially. Shortcuts are just quick commands that the end user might want. Surround allows us to attach the surround sound to a different display, so we're listening to whatever's on that display. But in addition to that, if we switch the sources or if we move a different source, for example, we take the center source and we move it to the top right, and it's attached to the top right, we're also going to still have to switch. So we're actually attaching the surround sound to a specific display. Control allows us to select a specific display and control whatever's on the display that's selected. Events are where we're going to have our event timers and things like that. Draperies are for controlling the drapes around the home. On the next page here, we have source selection by display if we're not going to use the macros or the scenes. So we can select a source and then select what we'd like to do on that display. And the volume allows us to select and control the TV volume independent of the surround sound, because we can actually play TV volume on all the displays at the same time we're doing the surround sound, which was a request of the end user directly. Just to point out, we also created this simple control, and the end user only sees these two rooms, simple control and living room. And simple control is just for guests and things like that, where they can easily control just the center TV and the surround sound, and just make it very simple so that they're not getting all these extra features that might confuse them. So let's take a look at the programming here. All right. And so let's take a look at the programming here. And if we go to living room, and you can see all the different submenus we've created, let's start and just kind of look at what a scene looks like. Or actually, well, let's start and look at us just setting the center source, which is actually where we already are. So you'll see that in the edit macros by room, I've made it very simple. There's just basically setting of a variable. And actually, the only two things that are required to make this work are these two commands, which is the source for the center TV, sat-master, and the macro setup center TV. The other two, the last set source is a variable that I have. I don't actually use it anywhere. It's just sometimes I like to have set variables that I create throughout the project just in case they could come in handy at some point. And then I have output to cloud logs, so that if I'm doing cloud logging to try to troubleshoot, I know, okay, this is where this part of the macro occurred, which is obviously very helpful when you consider we have multiple things happening at once, so we can actually see exactly when each part of the macro was triggered. So that can be very helpful in troubleshooting. And you'll see that as we switch and we look between the different inputs, it looks very similar across the board. So not doing anything too fancy yet, basically moving the set inputs and the set sources to a different part of the system, which will be the universal macros. And as we go through, you'll see top left source, bottom left source, top right source. It all looks the same, just with a different variable. If we look at our variable list, we have quite a few in the system. Okay, not as many as you might think for what we've accomplished, but we'll see how we're using those in a little bit. Center volume is just really simple. Those are serial over IP commands to just add power, which we then control with the Samsung into the X-Link port, which is awesome, easy, and it's just simple IP commands. In fact, they even work directly from Accelerator, which is nice because it's just using a standard driver. No modules actually required there. Control. Now, control is basically, so if I select control center, whatever's on the center TV is going to be controlled. It's going to jump to that source. So you can actually see here that it's just a simple variable to say, hey, which source is the center, and it goes through all the options and jumps to the proper once it finds it. I actually just noticed a bug, or then with Xbox and Wii, we actually don't have control, so nothing happens when they are using that. Now scenes is in here, it's just going to jump to the universal macro that we've created, and then pretty much jump to the master, or it's different based on which one. In party time we jump to east, which is the top left television, and that's all based on how the end user specified they wanted it to be. Now an important part to think about here is room syncing, and with this type of system, room syncing just didn't make sense. I mean, what do I sync to? I don't know. I'm turning on 5 sources in the same room. The system really doesn't have any way of knowing, oh, I should sync to the center TV or the left or the right. So, I would just point out here that in edit device layouts, if we go to the living room devices and we look at the master, we've actually set every source to unsynced. So this fixes the problem of having to even worry about syncing. And we're kind of doing syncing by having the user press control and then center, etc., which is still very quick and easy. Let's get back there. Now, as we were looking at scenes, they're all fairly simple in terms of what we're seeing here, but now let's kind of go into the back end and see what's happening in the background once we get into the universal macros. So under special macros, universal macros, here you'll see a lot of our programming here. Now I've programmed some extra scenes that I expect the end user might want at some point, just so that they're all in one place. And that's just my OCD taking effect. I guess to start, we'll look at the setup macros. Now we have a setup macro for every TV. Okay, and we have center TV, top left, bottom left, top right, bottom right. And you see they're all very similar. A lot of copy and pasting here to speed this up. This might look very complex to start, but once you get this concept and how to program this style, I think you'll find it becomes pretty awesome and easy to make some complex things go on. And you'll see that kind of come into play here. So these are really the heart of the system and how we're setting all the inputs. So you can see here we're first triggering an event trigger. And when we send this event trigger and this top and it says check surround attachment, we're actually triggering an entirely new macro, but that macro does not stop the current macro from happening. So it's going to trigger this and it's going to move on right away and keep going. And at the same exact time, it's going to be triggering another macro. And that macro might trigger 5 other macros. And it does, kind of queue some things up at times, but for the most part, you can actually have many, many things going on at the same time, which is how we get the effect of having, all 5 TVs turn on at the same time or change channels at the same time. and we'll see that as we kind of run through this. So then, this says if the variable source center is off, go ahead and turn off the TV. But if it's not, turn on the TV. And then you'll see here I say event triggers, turn the TV on again. And we have to do this just for a redundancy thing. It happens in the background, so basically this macro is going to turn on the TV at every couple seconds for a while, just to make sure it turns on. Then it says, if the variable sources include SAT, and this is a speed thing, and we're not going to get too deep into this at the moment, but essentially, if we look at set source for master, the variable is sat-master, sat-beta, sat-omega, or ATV, which doesn't have SAT. So what we're doing here is it's all about speed to say, as it's processing the variables, it says, does it include SAT? Because if it doesn't, I don't care if it includes master, alpha, gamma, or omega. I only care if it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then does it include Apple TV, Xbox, or Wii? So basically what we're doing is we're just exponentially speeding up the macro to actually trigger the command when we want to use Apple TV, Xbox, or Wii. Honestly, probably wouldn't notice the difference, but it's just another OCD thing. So you can see it's essentially just changing the just add powers input and output, input. So fairly simple, and then turning on the SAT boxes, which the SAT boxes actually are just kept on for the most part, but we just put it there just in case. And we can see for Apple TV and Xbox, so simple enough. Now, here's another way we're using event triggers, which is pretty cool. Here I'm setting the TV to HDMI 2, but what happens when the TV starts off? Now, I always turn the TV to HDMI 1 as soon as we turn off the system. So the TVs are always going to be on the HDMI 1, which is the just add power. But the gaming systems use direct HDMI, and the gaming systems are local and they're close to the TVs, so that the end user doesn't have to go to the equipment closet. And when the TVs turn on, instead of having any kind of delay to worry about, I simply set HDMI 2, so at least it's happening right away if the TV was already on. But then I use event triggers to say, in 10 seconds, okay, don't pause, don't take up any resources, just stop. But in 10 seconds, go ahead and let's try to turn the HDMI 2 again. So that happens in the background, and regardless if the end user is on the remote controlling something else. So we're scheduling a command to happen in the future. Now, this is done very easily. We have an event ID, and I've called it center HDMI 2. We say trigger event in the future here, and we say in 10 seconds. Now, what's cool is if you actually do schedule something to happen in the future, say it's an hour in the future, and then 10 minutes later the user wants to cancel that, or you want to cancel that, you can use cancel as well so that the command does not happen if you don't want it to. So we're using that to set our inputs here, and then we just have some output to cloud logs. So that's your setup, and they're all relatively the same for each display. Now, why you see some changes is, in this case, we're using an HDMI splitter. Now, the end user didn't necessarily want to spend the extra money to distribute Xbox and Wii to all TVs, but they did want to be able to distribute to at least 2 each. So we have Wii capable of distributing to the bottom left and the center, and we have the Xbox capable of the bottom right and the center TVs. And we can use a splitter to enhance that in the future if he so wishes. Now, all TVs on and all TVs off. Now, this is another thing to kind of show you. And when I turn all the TVs off or on, you notice they kind of all come on at once, or they all turn off at once. Sometimes there's some delays. It usually just depends on how many things are going on, or if the system's processing something at that time. When I do all TVs off, you'll notice these aren't commands, these are event triggers, and they're all 5 event triggers. Which means I'm triggering 5 macros to happen at the same time. And there is a slight delay, about 0.1 seconds per command. So we do actually put a small delay in the event triggers, the actual macro that the event trigger triggers, um, in order to compensate for that. So it ends up being like a half of a second before we turn on the center, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, and 0.1. Swap is also in here. And swap is essentially saying take whatever's on the center. You know, if we want to swap center and top right, we just swap what's on one with the other. So we're just switching the inputs, and we process that here. Swap top left, and we process that, and then we use event triggers to continue processing. So it works very well. It's very fast. It's very reliable. It's been pretty cool. So I'll let you, the files, you can have the file. It's uploaded in various places, so I'll let you take a look at that and try to kind of decipher how that works, but very cool overall. Set up surround sound. Since the surround sound can't be attached to video here, this is essentially just switching the HDMI input. In our case, Just Add Power has an HDMI pass-through port. So we're just using that pass-through port to take HDMI directly into the Yamaha Avantage receiver to get our surround sound audio. And we don't use the HDMI outputs at all on the Yamaha at this point. And then of course the Apple TV is just AV1, that's just optical. And then we ran coax from the stand, which is where the gaming systems are, back to the Yamaha, and we just run the digital coax right into the Yamaha for the gaming systems. Now the end user does have the ability to switch the sound modes, so every time that we set up surround or we switch the sources, we automatically set it back to the surround decoder so that we know he's on the sound mode we want. He can change it around, and then it's automatically going to go back. Now, okay, so when we do scenes, and I'm going to start with the sports scene, we'll kind of see how that gets affected. So here comes the sports scene. I don't have the boot logos on, but all the TVs coming on mine. Okay. So we have our scene. Now, what you'll notice, and here's where you can see event triggers in use, is if I do scenes and then I say networks, which will change all the channels around, you're going to notice they're actually all going at once. And as we're doing that, we're going to show you now kind of how that comes together and how that looks. So let's take a look at the programming for that. So here's the sports scene being programmed. And the first thing we do is we create a thread or a macro. Now, when I say thread, think of it as multiple macros happening at the same time. So I'm going to create a thread, and I'm going to call that all sat. And all sat is essentially just doing this. And this is kind of to reset everything. So if he's swapped things around and he's changed cable box or sat boxes to, for example, the one that's normally on the bottom right is now on the top left, that's not going to work for me. I mean, I'm going to have to do a lot of programming to say, okay, which one's on this display? Okay, change it to this channel. So essentially what we're doing with the change to all sat is we are positioning the sat boxes in their default position, which is master in the center, and then alpha bottom right, beta top right, gamma top left, and omega bottom left. He's since switched that now for his own use to master north, south, east, and west. He's a football guy. So what we're seeing here is I'm just saying all the source variables are being set, and then I'm creating all of these different threads to set the sources. And then I'm using refresh surround so that if a new source is on the attached surround display, it will play that audio properly. So we move all of the sats to the right place, and now we're going to set the channels. Now, we could have made this a lot easier because the end user is really just always using, so he's always using, NFL Network, he's always putting on the top right. So I could have just programmed that hard. I could have just programmed the channels right here. And that would have been easy enough, but couple issues with that. If I just set all of the channels that way, then it's going to be one by one. So, bottom right's going to switch a channel, then top right. It's not going to be kind of a simultaneous look and feel, which really adds to the appeal of the system. So instead, we created this method, which is to use variables. And you can see we've categorized them again. So, when I look at news, I look at networks, and that's just for them. You'll see in a moment where we're using that. So sports ESPN News, sports NFL, etc. Then we're going to mute all of the TVs, and we do that because that's just part of his scene. He just only wants to hear surround sound, but sometimes he will turn the TV volumes to different levels. So we do use the discrete volume on the TVs to do that. Then we manually attach, or I guess automatically attach the surround sound to the center display. So that way if he was listening to top left, we actually switch that for him automatically. And then we have all of the set channel event triggers, each one in their own thread, so that they will all occur at the same time. And you can see here, we're just triggering the event immediately, master channel, north channel, etc. So we'll take a look at those macros now. And keep in mind that all of them are happening at the same time based on these variables. So in this example, we're going to look at set channel master. Keep in mind that right here, we've set the variable chan master to sports-ESPN. So here's our event triggers, or our device events here. And if we look at master channel, nice long macro here. And I have this for master, I have this for north, south, east, or east-west. And they're all identical except for which variables they're looking at. So if you remember, we set this to sports-ESPN. And when we look through here, the first thing I do is press exit on the master sat. And this is just IR control at this time. I'm not using IP at this time. That would actually make it easier, but we are switching out all the boxes and stuff. So I just did it IR because of that. Now I use exit first because you can't really do some things if you don't exit. So if he was like in the menu or something, we start by just exiting, so we're on the front page. If he's already on the front page or the actual TV channel, he's not. If he's already on there, it won't make a difference. Then it says if variable chan master includes sports. And it does. It's sports-ESPN if you remember the chan master variable. And then it says, does it include NFL? No, it does not. Does it include ESPN-news? No, it does not. Does it include ESPN? Yes. Now here we have to be careful because if ESPN was above, it would be correct if it was ESPN News, because ESPN News does include ESPN. So there are things that you have to think about or consider when creating a system like this. So if variable chan master includes ESPN, it does, then go ahead to 2, 0, 6. One thing we did do here, which was amazing, I can't tell you how much time it ended up saving us, but we put this universal macro in for favorites delay. Now instead of hard coding 0.1 seconds between each number, we do this same universal macro, which means that I could change this to 0.3 and it would change it for all of the channels and all of the different areas that we used it simultaneously. We originally had 0.1 seconds. It was not long enough of a delay to reliably change the channels, so it was a huge help that we did it that way. So it's going to go ahead and change this to 206, and this looks long and it looks slow, but I mean, you saw how fast it actually works. It actually just jumps right after this directly down here and presses enter and then presses exit. So that's it. Now all of these again are happening at the same time to give us the effect of all of the channels changing simultaneously, as you saw when we had the camera set. So we obviously have a lot of things going on here. Different processing for surround sound, and that's just setting the surround sound as we switch displays around. We have our swaps here to confirm the swap, to kind of start that. And these are just triggering the swap macros for the universal macros. Okay, but the end of the day, as you look through this file and you start to understand kind of how it's structured, it's actually not that crazy. I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same concept being utilized over and over in different ways. And that concept is just using variables, changing variables, and processing it. Okay, so let's add this, let's take this, and it's just going through the mix. Now this type of stuff, for example, this is going to get processed by URC's controller in like a tenth of a second. So you don't have to worry about these becoming long. You know, I mean, you want to be as smart as possible to make them as fast as possible. But you know, this will take you, probably 0.3 well, with the delays, less than a second. But what event triggers allows us to do is really trigger any macro we want wherever. All of those restrictions that you have are gone. You can nest universal macros within universal macros. So, for example, and I know I've used this in multiple places, but, here's a perfect example where event triggers here when the scene sports, when we're doing this all sat. Well, all sat is right here. But I can't go over here and say, okay, where's universal macros? URC doesn't allow you to do that, and for good reason for the most part, because you could get yourself into really, really big trouble and lock up your system pretty intensely if you created a loop, which was, okay, this universal macro, or universal macro 1, triggers universal macro 2, which triggers universal macro 1. Okay, now all of a sudden that macro is going forever. But with event triggers being a third party and everything, it's up to your own mind to make sure you don't loop things. So here we are triggering all sat, which then triggers here. Okay, but it's going to do that at the same time it continues to do this. So while it's setting all of the sources essentially and setting all the displays, it can still change the channels. So it's doing that, and then it's changing all the channels at the same time. So suddenly we are changing 5 satellite boxes channels at the same exact time. We are setting 5 displays sources. So we're doing 10 macros, okay? And then we're refreshing the surround, so that's 11 macros. And then we are muting all the TVs, which is another 5 macros. So that's 16 macros happening at the exact same time. I'm sure some get done before others, but at the end of the day, this scene is 16 macros. And the different scenes are very similar. Here we're doing Apple TV, which we wait for 5 seconds, so it has time to do these things up here. Xbox all 5 is just putting the Xbox on the main TV and leaving whatever was on the outside TVs on. His party scene, where he's playing music in one area, and Xbox and Wii on there, and a couple other things. So that kind of gives you a general idea of how this kind of all comes together and how you can kind of see this file and try to kind of follow along with the demo video to kind of see as I'm pressing various sources or scenes and stuff how it's actually working. So definitely a lot of fun to program at the end of the day. It was fun to see it all come together. Obviously, if you were in the HIP chat, you saw me talking about it all the time. Because this is obviously, it's just kind of a cool thing to see all this fun stuff working. So we'll turn the camera on here one more time. And now that kind of we've gone over it some more, let's take a look. And I'm going to set scenes. And let's go ahead and just do a couple scenes with Bright Kids first so you can kind of see it all working again. Okay, so it means that.com. Or let's go and let's try news. Or is party time scene. Now Wii U is not set up, so it's probably not going to work. Xbox down at the bottom right. And he's controlling, in this case, he's controlling the top right. Okay, Xbox is off actually, so it's like TV's black. all sat, which is just going to set the sats as needed. It's pretty much the same, not changing any channels. You have networks, Apple TV in the bottom left, and then the network channels that you wanted. Okay. Now swap, if you're going to look at swap, uh, you basically go to center source or whatever source you want. You can swap top right. And then there's the surround sound processes, switches over. You saw it, bottom right. And you can see that with the Just Add Power, the instant video switch is pretty cool. Swap top left, swap top right. And other things become really easy too, and you can see if you go to, for example, all source, and you look at that part of the system, you'll see it, it's not really a lot more programming to do that type of stuff. So if I want to say all source master, it becomes a lot easier to do that because it's just setting, a couple variables and then triggering a couple universal macros or Apple TV. So pretty cool. Thought it would be fun to do a little kind of an installer version of the preview video so that you guys could see everything and how it kind of comes together. If you have any questions, feel free at any time to come into the HIP chat, ask your questions there, and be glad to answer anything that you would have or share any files that we have that we're using in there. So thanks a lot for your time, guys, and hope you like what you saw and start using event triggers.